Well, now I'm going to try and explain to you how I managed to make some brass finials and column bases for my clocks from solid brass on a lathe and doing it by hand. This is an introduction, and I'll show you practical examples later in the video, but I just want to explain to you what we do. Now this is a three jaw chuck here. It's similar to this, which is a four jaw chuck. Yeah, but the problem is when you have a four jaw chuck and you want to turn something which is going to be something similar to this, which is a, where is it gone? Here we are, which is a finial. That is not good enough, because each time you put it into the jaws of the chuck and turn, then when you take it out, you'll find that it will, instead of being where you had it before, slightly removed from there, and consequently you can't really get it to work properly. So what I had to do was to turn from the stock, this, which I cut to size, to length. I planned what I was going to do first by drawing an example here. You can see that's in detail. That is from the original, which is like this. And that's the finial that goes onto the clock that you'll see later on. It's got a thread at the bottom, but when I finished doing what I had to do, I couldn't put the thread at the bottom. I had to put it at the top. I had to countersink the thread into the finial because I had to screw it down. But it works just as well, but they're not interchangeable as the other three are. When I cut this, you'll see later on in the video examples of what happened. I then applied this drawing to the surface of that using the usual dye that you get, which gives you a coating which you can then work to. It's the blue coating here, which is very useful, and you can draw lines on it, and so you then know where you're working to. I took a photocopy, I took a photograph of this, then I printed off the photograph, and I got it in full size so that I got something like this, which then I could hold up and I could read easily while I was doing the turning and cutting. The first thing I did was to cut the block that I made, which was oversized. I made it to, what was it, 60 millimeters overall, and then I turned on the boss of it very carefully a 6 millimeter diameter base, and with that I was able to insert that into a 6 millimeter diameter chuck, so that this then goes into that, and if you take it out it'll find the same center in the lathe. That's quite essential, because if you take it out you can never get the same center with the lathe here, because the jaws don't home in exactly the same way as they did before. Then when I had the base cut, I then thinned that down, which you'll see on my diagrams. I cut heavily with ordinary cutters on the lathe, which is a shear line lathe. Yeah, you can see it. It's American. They're quite expensive, but if you're going to do any clock repairs seriously, then over a period of time you will definitely need this, because it's invaluable. It really is, and you should get the the drill as well. Now, in doing this, then I got so far, you can cut so far with the standard cutters that you get and you fit into the lathe on the bed over here, on this bed, so that you can take the heavy metal out. So when you cut it, you take out sections of it, so that you'll take out all this there, and you use a 2mm cutter on that, just easing it down all the time, and that'll leave you room enough to be able to cut the collars, which are on the original. The tools to do it are relatively simple. Now I'll just illustrate on the lathe first of all. When the lathe is running at full speed, up here, you can see that's dangerous, because you stick something in that and you're going to come unstuck. But if you slow that right down so that it's like this, you can touch that and it's not going to really do you much damage. And if you put something into it, it'll jam. So you're not going to get your tools thrown out of that. You can control them quite easily. The tools that I have are, they call them gravers, and you buy the length of steel, which is here, which is relatively small, and if you buy them like this, they are already tempered and hardened, so you have to grind them on a wheel, and you grind them to the desired size or ending for them, how you want the cutter to look at the end. Now this one's got a diamond on it, and this one has got a diamond with a little flat on the top. It's just a tiny flat. It just gives you that little bit of extra. These two have got just flats on them, and as that one. And then I made my own cutters out of drills, 2 drill bits I used. This is the lighter one, which is probably better of more use. And this is the thicker and heavier one. You anneal them first, so you soften them up, then you stick them in the grinding wheel, and you get a nice face on them. And then when you've got the face, you smooth that face off on a stone, so that, or perhaps a diamond cutter like this one here, which is a relatively inexpensive Chinese diamond cutter, which you can get the face to the angle that you want. And then after that you then harden them, and you can see, I think, maybe better on this one, I hope. You can see the difference in the colours. I hardened it and I've got the blue there, and then it gradually goes to straw colour, and the tip was straw. When the tip was straw, I then plunged it into water. But when you're annealing them, you get them red hot, cherry red, and then you gradually cool it, so slowly, by taking the heat off gradually. And then after that, when you want to get these to the right hardness, you have to get the whole of this. You get the blue, and then it'll creep up, and the blue will be here, and then it gets darker and darker, and it goes up to straw, sorry, lighter and lighter, then it goes up to a straw colour. You don't want to get that red hot, you just want to get it onto a straw colour. Then go round to the pub and get champagne corks, because they actually do hold, you can hold those very firmly, and the lathe is going at a very slow speed, and as opposed to having a fancy wooden handle, which you can do if you want, but quite frankly I don't think it's necessary. These handles are very good. I had a lot of wooden handles which like this, which quite frankly waste a bloody time, because this, you just stick it in, it holds it firm, and you've got quite a nice holding piece to hang on to. So Shoreline lathe, very low speed, almost not moving. You use these on a rest, which is supplied by Shoreline at additional cost, which is this is the hand rest. So you put that in, and you'll see it in later in the video, and you rest that against the piece that you're turning on the lathe, and you turn it. You get that very close to the piece, but it's turning at such a slow speed, you don't come anywhere near getting into a danger, which I thought you would do initially when I started doing this. This chuck will fit into that section there, and that's the drawbar which pulls it into the taper, the Morse taper, and that squeezes these three lines here, sections together, and it holds the piece here firmly, and you can then cut it with using these into the curves that you need. So you can see that this one you put in there and it cuts the curve, and you just rock it backwards and forwards. In fact it's quite fun doing it. You'd think it's when you see it all done it's quite difficult, but actually it's time consuming, but it's really rather satisfying, because you're making something similar to the originals, and that is really quite good. I mean, that's not particularly right. This is fatter than this one, but I took it off a bit too soon. But when you've got them on, you'll see later in the video, they actually look pretty good. So I think I'll get on with the practical side now. You'll see it's very disjointed, because trying to sort it out is quite difficult. That's a tooling point. It's Gloucester Tooling Co. UK telephone number. I hope you can see it. If you wanted to get any tooling, you can buy it, quite easily on the internet, but that was one of them, and it's very satisfactory. Well, I'll take you on now to the other videos. I then cut it to suit the dimensions, and when I get the dimensions to the point where they are like this, I cut it down to a 12mm boss, which will fit into the chuck. Not the chuck, the block. And then I turn it, leaving the 12mm boss, with a 6mm end, which will go into a chuck, which will then hold the entire section in place while I then cut it by hand on the lathe. And that is done here on the lathe. So that it now has the basic cuts completed. And then I finish that off by using homemade in some cases this is a homemade that's better. This is a drill, old drill, which I've then stuck onto a champagne cork, which is a very good handle, and I can then use this to cut out the curved sections. And when it comes to the various other sections that I've got to cut out, I've used stock purchased material like this and this. Here we are. And another one which is very useful is this one. They're called gravers, and this is gravers steel. That the other one, which I showed you, similar to this one, this is a bigger drill bit, again in a champagne cork, lots of champagne, which I anneal. I temper it up and then anneal it so that I've toughened it, and you can see that on the back you can see the tempering marks. I hope it changed from blue to straw colour, and then it was nice and hard. And I keep it touched up on this diamond stone whilst I'm working. Yeah, one of these Chinese diamond stones which you can touch up very easily on the work. Constantly comparing my cut with the samples of these so that I can see how they're going. And so this has got a screw boss on it. I will have just a 6mm boss will fit into the hole because that's what it is. And you can see I'm coming on quite well with this. I'll give you an illustration of how it's working. But so then I've got to cut the rest of it, which is the other end up here, which is there up against a centre pin, but what do they call it, a live centre to help to keep it steady. I'm making the heavy cuts with so the heavy cuts are made here with this tool there. I still can't show you properly. It's it's that which cuts a 2mm groove, and knowing it's 2mm, I can easily adjust it in its cutting so that it will take out the right amount of material as I'm using it. Come on, baby, come on. There we are. That's a quick change tool. And this is another cutter that I use for that, to take the to face up the material, face up the brass. What I should have done, and it's quite important if you're ever going to try this, and if you've got a live centre, is to make sure that you, when you're preparing the brass, you have a centre point at the back, at the end, on both ends. As you can see, I've got one here which I can use, but I haven't got one on this one that's so relevant. And it means that when you line it up, you can then get the centre, which is important when you're running it on the lathe. And I've never never made anything on the lathe before, but it's apart from one other piece. it's an education. It's just really very pleasing when you can get it to work. So I'll come back and show you what I'm doing on the lathe by hand in a minute. Okay, so I've got that line there. This wasn't very good because I took it out. Never mind. So. Not very good, that, but it'll work. It'll be all right. I've got it marked. Get that off. Get rid of this. Going to be a long job. I'll probably have to go back and do a deep cut with the block, cutter block. Go a little bit closer. There we are. So now this is in a chuck, which is a 6mm chuck, which will take that reasonably well. Takes this part, this spot there, as opposed to having a block which is like that, which actually tends to be not so secure when you get down to the size of 6mm. And since I had to cut this, which has both ends, had to cut this from both ends, so you have to have something that you can work from into the lathe. I hope that's clear, but anyway, that's what it's going to be like. So it's not very sharp. So you can see that it's a slow job. Now we're getting on towards the final stages by hand with these hand breakers that I made. So let's see how we can do on this. Not really quite the same, but I think it'll pass. It's a bit long and thin, isn't it? Using the made one made out of drill bit. It's curved, it's round, and you can get in. You get quite a decent curve. I want to keep more length at the bottom section. I'll probably do it. Not quite. Not looking too bad now. Not bad. I think it's almost there. It's quite interesting to note that my favourite tool is this one, made out of a high-speed steel drill bit. Flattened at the end, you can see, I hope that you can see the chopping here. It's sort of small down at that end, so that it's nice and hard. And I just chop it up from time to time with some cheapo Chinese diamonds. So, around there. And you can get the curve though, in the waist, so beautifully. Obviously, if you give it that pretty well. But I haven't done any of that work. We've got these to reconstruct one of these finials, so that it's going to be possible, but it's not there. People won't look at it and say, what the hell's that? It'll pass. This is moving sufficiently slowly for it not to hurt you if you brush against it. I don't think the tool, wouldn't it? Yes. Right. Not sure if that's not going to be as good as I can get it. Needs to be shorter, doesn't it? There we are. Just about don't want to do too much of that because that's bad practice on a lathe with sandpaper and abrasives. Now let's see what that looks like. There we are. So I've now placed those in there. And it's a bit gleamy, but by the time I've cleaned it up, I think it'll pass. There was none there before, and now it's got 4 of them. We've got 2 there and 2 on the other side. So we're getting close to finishing. I have prepared a second one, which I will probably make just to be able to say that I can see how they work and what is done. So, more and on. This is cleaned up very well. So there we are.